Dr. Gosnell Yorke. I am the coordinator of the Dag Hammarskjöld Institute for Peace and Conflict Studies here at the Copperbelt University. At the Lusaka branch, our main office is some 6 hours drive away to the north in the Copperbelt, hence the Copperbelt University. So I'm in the nation's capital coordinating our branch office here. My basic research project, I think, is captured in a working book title. And that working title is Who is an African? Reflections on issues in Afro ancestry, identity, and destiny from a human rights perspective. Reflections on issues in Afro ancestry, I mean, from where have we come? Identity, who are we? And destiny, where are we going? And from a human rights perspective. My research profile is informed both by my own biography and my academic and professional journey. And I say journey because it's not a destination. It's still, I'm still on the way in trying to determine what, in my considered opinion, constitutes African identity, because that is still a highly contested issue, and we cannot speak meaningfully about African identity, about the African Union, about Africa and its diaspora, if we are not settled in terms of what constitutes African identity, what constitutes Africanness. So I'm hoping that as a result of that, it will bring greater clarity, it will help disambiguate the discourse. Because I find that in different contexts, some of us define African identity quite differently. I can think, for example, of a former president of South Africa, whose picture I have in my office here, because as honorary consul for my Caribbean state of St. Nevis to South Africa, in 2004, April, at his second inauguration, former President Thabo Mbeki, he gave a wonderful speech about who an African is. I am an African is the title of his speech. And when speaking to the nation, that took on a rather all-embracing, all-encompassing definition. He used geography as the main criterion to determine who is an African. So if you were born on the continent, the mere fact that your umbilical cord was cut here qualifies you for being an African. So if you have Arabic identity, you're African. If you're of European descent, you're an African. But what I find interesting is that when when former President Thabo Mbeki found himself in an ANC setting of the African National Congress, and they talk about who an African is, it takes on a very different complexion. And the word complexion there perhaps is deliberately chosen because in that context, an African is one who is unambiguously, as we would say today, black, and not as all-inclusive as he does appear when he speaks to the nation at large. And he's just an example of the kind of equivocation that I find when one attempts to determine and define what constitutes African identity. We sometimes take it for granted that we know who an African is. And I think that by teasing out those different responses will prove useful as we move forward in working together in global Africa, the language of UNESCO, encompassing all 6 regions of the African Union, the 5 that are here, and the African diaspora, where our scattered sons and daughters are, will constitute the 6th region as a whole. So that essentially is why I think a research of this kind is important, because it will help to disambiguate and to give us a greater sense of certainty, because you find that contestation taking place in the diaspora itself. Who is an African is being answered very differently in the diaspora. The hope is that it will bring greater clarity and boost the confidence of those of us who would wish to claim our African identity without apology. 2 fields readily come to mind. One is history. Those of my colleagues who are scholars of African history, their input will be quite helpful. Second discipline which will be useful is psychology. The psychologist will be important. Why? Again, because I have lived in Africa here for all these years, and again, socialized in the diaspora, we all would know the importance of storytelling. And so what might appear anecdotal is meant to make a very important point. I already talked about former President Thabo Mbeki. Now I want to talk about two colleagues with whom I interacted in a professional space, the Transatlantic Roundtable on Religion and Race. We had a last conference in 2019 in Nairobi, Kenya. And in that space, I raised a similar question about the appropriateness of the word Black in describing an African. As one who is trained in language as well, I'm very sensitive to how language works. And so I made that point, and the response was quite instructive. First of all, the response came from a sociologist friend, and she was trying to defend the continued use of the descriptor Black and saying, well, you know, Black might have negative connotations in some contexts, but you know, we have a sociological theory which says that you can take something that is negative and transform it into something positive. So even though Black might be negative in some contexts, we are now using it positively. So echoing the language or the song of perhaps James Brown, I am Black and I'm proud, and things of that kind. The psychologist then responded in agreement with me, said, you know, you might have a point there, because the word Black tends to suggest the negative, especially when it stands in polar opposite to whiteness. Well, whiteness in the popular imagination suggests innocence, purity, and then it's considered normative. And if you put the polar opposite to that which is Black, it then suggests that we are non-normative, we are impure. So I think it works on us psychologically, as much as we try to persuade ourselves that it serves a positive purpose. So the psychologist would be useful, the historian would be useful, maybe the social worker as well, anyone who is interacting in any meaningful way with Africans, whether here in the continent or elsewhere. So that's why I would wish to affirm the Sherpa Institute for the Study of Contemporary Africa for what I think it represents, the attempt to boost the confidence of what it means to be African, so that we can embrace our identity and we can contribute as academics to Agenda 2063, the language of the African Union, the African Development Agenda, so we can experience a greater human flourishing. We can experience our human rights in a more meaningful way. So it seems to me at the end of the day, in this book project would also make the fundamental point that our salvation lies in embracing the continent, embracing the motherland where I now find myself. So going forward, I hope that I can draw on colleagues who can journey with me in answering this fundamental question: who is an African? What constitutes African identity in our own time? Thank you very much.